Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of our AHI Virtual Speakers Forum. As always, we are coming to you live from our American Hellenic Institute headquarters in Washington, D.C. Hellenic House. My name is Nick Larigakis, president of the American Hellenic Institute, and it is a pleasure to have you with us all once again. During this month of July, we will be focusing our attention on issues relating to Cyprus and the unfortunate circumstances that occurred there 46 years ago in July of 1974. Today's Zoom presentation will feature and highlight on a topic that maybe not too many of you are aware, but is one that currently still exists. And that is the missing persons in Cyprus from 1974. Turkey's legacy continues. As the audience is well aware, Turkey's invasion of the Republic of Cyprus resulted in Turkey's illegal occupation of 37% of the island, with 180,000 Greek Cypriots forced from their homes and properties and becoming refugees in their own countries. In addition to that, 200,000 illegal Turkish settlers approximately have now occupied the occupied portion of Cyprus. And over the years has been destruction of religious and cultural property. Unfortunately, one tragic consequence of the invasion that is underreported and little known is that of the missing. Those individuals whose families have identified as have gone missing following the 1974 invasion. The Committee on Missing Persons in Cyprus, or as it's known by its acronym CMP, was established in 1981 by an agreement between the Greek Cypriot and Turkish Cypriot communities with the backing of the United Nations to determine the fate of 2,200 persons reported missing as a result of 1974 invasion and previous intercommunal fighting. In 2007, the CMP began returning the first remains of individuals to their families. Unfortunately, Turkey's illegal occupation of Cyprus has had an adverse impact upon the Committee on Missing Persons' ability to access certain Turkish military installations on the occupied part of Cyprus, and therefore to excavate the remains of Cypriots missing for proper identification. More than 800 Greek Cypriots, including 4 Americans, ladies and gentlemen, remain missing, and a large majority of these cases remain unresolved. As I said, to bring some awareness and focus on this issue today, we've invited 2 individuals whose main focus is to deal with this particular issue. And they are, of course, Mr. Fotis Fotiou, the Presidential Commissioner for Humanitarian Affairs and Overseas Cypriots, and Mr. Xenophon Kallis, Director of Service for Missing Persons. They will detail for us the painstaking and emotional work being performed on Cyprus to bring a sense of peace to the families of the missing. I would now like to introduce our first distinguished speaker today, Mr. Fotis Fotiou. He is the Presidential Commissioner for Humanitarian Affairs and Overseas Cypriots. Mr. Fotiou received his BA in Accounting and Marketing at Eastern Michigan University. He has worked in several big auditing firms and the Inland Revenue Department of the Ministry of Finance, which is the sort of IRS for Cyprus. He's had different roles in his political party, the Demokratiko Koma, over the years. And on August of 2003, he was appointed as chairman of the Cyprus Tourism Organization. Since then, he's has held ministerial positions in a number of posts, including from June 2006 to February 2008, where he was appointed Minister of Agriculture, Natural Resources, and Environment. And from the March 2003 to 14 was Minister of Defense. And since September of 2014 to the present, he's been the Presidential Commissioner for Humanitarian Affairs and Overseas Cypriots. Mr. Fotiou, it is a pleasure to welcome you once again to our Zoom presentation. We had you on last week with our student program. It's always a pleasure to see you. And I pass on the Zoom microphone to you for your opening comments.
Thank you, Nick. First of all, I would like to thank you once again. I would like to thank Achi for this initiative, discussing one of the most dramatic issue and one of the most humanitarian Turkish invasion. And I would like also to welcome my associate, Mr. Galis. He's working on missing persons issue for many, many years. And I hope that tonight he will answer a lot of questions to your participants. And of course, I would like to welcome and thank all participants of this teleconference. Of course, as you know, because of the situation all over the world, and I'm talking about the pandemic, COVID-19, the work of CMP has been suspended. And so far, since March, no excavations or identifications of remains took place. I'm aware that in the last few days, they have given permission from the other side to start excavations in the occupied region. And we hope that soon we are going to have some results. But first of all, let me tell you this. The government of Cyprus, all governments of Cyprus, consider that this issue, it's a humanitarian issue, it should not be linked to the efforts to find a solution of our political problem. Unfortunately, Turkey is not considering this issue a humanitarian one. And as always, they are playing games with this issue. And this is why the results of CMP committee are very, very disappointed in the last 3 or 4 years. I can give you some numbers, and I can tell you that since now, this represents, we have 800 cases of missing Greek and Greek Cypriots still pending, and this represents more than 50% of the total cases submitted to the CMP. The CMP's excavation program started in 2005, and after 14 years of operation, there are still, as I told you, more than 800 cases still outstanding. Now, in addition to this, we have to say that we have another 400 Greek and Greek Cypriots who are buried in known and unknown burial places in the occupied northern part of Cyprus. And this is another issue. They are not included in the missing persons list, but still their families cannot have the remains of their beloved ones to go for funerals. I can tell you, of course, from the official statistics of CMP, that the identification, the individuals exhumed in the last few years are very, very disappointed. For example, in 2016, it was around 90. Then 2017, it was 40. 2018, 12. 2019, 24. And 2020, 1 or 2. So you can see from the results that we are in a stage that I can say that it's very, very, very critical. Of course, we have to try again and work hard. That's why we are working together with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, with the relatives organizations, and with our representative in CMP, so that we can push again, and United Nations, the Organization of United Nations, European Union, who is the main donor of the program. The main donor of the program is European Union. So they have a responsibility, and they have to do something, and they have to push Turkey to cooperate on this issue. Of course, United States is another country that can play a very, very important role. Let me remind you that still in the list, there are American citizens. So United States has to play a more vital and important role. And we are expecting from the administration and our people there, and Congress, of course, that they will push Turkey more. Of course, I have to tell you the main problems that we are facing now. The first one is the one that I have already told you, the dramatic decrease in the number of remains exhumed from burial sites. And this is a main issue for us and for CMP, of course. And the other issue is that the Turkish army is in a position to provide the needed information from its archives to the CMP, so that we can increase the effectiveness of CMP. The Turkish army carried out a lot of burials that Turkish Cypriots are not aware of, especially burials of Greek Cypriots missing in action. And these burials took place after the clearing of the battlefields by the units of the Turkish army. So the Secretary General of the United Nations, in one of his letters, and this is very important, to the leaders of the communities, requested that this information from the clearing the battlefields should be provided to the CMP. Unfortunately, this has never been response to the call of the Secretary General from the part of the government of Turkey. Concerning the Turkish military archives, there is an agreement in the framework of the CMP meetings that all information has to be submitted by the Turkish military archives to CMP. So far, nothing has been submitted to CMP. And let me tell you this, all information regarding the big burial sites, all information regarding our people, our missing person, they have them in their archives, and they are refusing to submit this information to CMP. There is also a need for more information to the families who receive for burials the remains of their loved ones. There is a request from these families for more information about the cases of their loved ones, so they can proceed to a closure of this drama. In this case, we feel that again, all this information is in the archives of the military army of Turkey. There is another big problem, and this is a relocation of remains back in 1992-93. I think that this is well known that in many cases, the Turkish army purposely interfere, and they have removed the remains to unknown places. And as a result of this, during exhumations, carried out by CMP, only parts or a few parts or a few bones are found and given to relatives for funerals. We had the bad experience in the last, I think it was on February. We have given to a family a tooth to go for funeral. We have given to a family, a Greek Cypriot family, just a finger, a small part of. Majority of identifications of the CMP relating to missing Greek Cypriots relate only to few bones, and in some cases only to, as I told you, one single bone. In this, of course, tragic aspect, there is also no cooperation on the part of the Turkish government. Let me tell you also that we are trying a lot, and we have proved ourselves that to find the Turkish Cypriots that are in the list of CMP. And as a government, all governments of the Republic of Cyprus, we did our best and we are doing our best for their identification. And this is why we call this issue humanitarian, because the pain of the family, the pain of the mother, the pain of the father, the brother and sister is the same, either if he's a Turkish Cypriot or if he's a Greek Cypriot, the missing person. So yes, we are doing our best. We did a lot for the Turkish Cypriots, and we are continuing to do our best so that the identification and exhumation of the Turkish Cypriots missing persons will complete successfully. Now, I believe that now I'm coming to some recommendations, what we can do now, 46 years after the Turkish invasion. First of all, I think that, as I told you, European Union has to play a more important role pushing Turkey to cooperate. They are paying more than 2.7 million euros to CMP for this program. So they have to push Turkey, and they have to ask Turkey to release all this information. United Nations, of course, they can play an important role too. And believe me, still, we are working on the archives of United Nations that we should have had this information years ago. And we have this information now, and the archives, of course, and we are trying to work on these archives to see if there is useful information for CMP. Of course, diplomatically, we have to coordinate our efforts with Greece. We are coordinating our efforts so far, but we are planning on a level of a ministerial level to have a meeting in Athens so that we can see how we can proceed the two countries, because as you know, there are also Greeks in the list of missing persons. So in order to improve the effectiveness of the CMP and to secure the needed information, Turkey has to release the information concerning the mass burials of Greek Cypriots carried out by the Turkish army. And that happened around July, August, after the Turkish invasion. Release the information, of course, as I said, concerning the location of the new burial sites pertaining to the remains, they were removed intentionally by the Turkish army from the primary burial places. And of course, to implement without further delays the 2001 decision, and this is very important too, of the European Court of Human Rights concerning the missing Greek Cypriots. There was in 2001 a very important decision by the European Court of Human Rights that Turkey is refusing to implement. And of course, allows unimpeded access to military zone for investigation as well as excavations. In conclusion, I would like to say that if in the next few months or in maybe in the next in 2021, if things will not turn to positive as far as CMP is concerned, then I'm afraid that maybe we are going to have issues as far as the operation of CMP, because as far as we cannot exhume missing persons, then there will be no job for CMP to carry out. So this is the issue on a political level, of course, of CMP, of missing persons. And of course, Mr. Gallis will give you more information as far as the operations and the operation of CMP and more specific issues that we are facing and we are working on. But I'm repeating and I'm saying again, we have to consider the missing persons issue as a humanitarian one. This is the issue behind the missing persons. The pain of the relatives, most of the mothers, you have to know that passed away, most of the fathers passed away without having the opportunity to have a funeral for their sons. And this is a very, very tragic situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Fotiu, for that overview of the issues regarding the missing and what you face on a daily basis to try to come to a resolution of these outstanding issues regarding the missing. Now we will turn our attention to Mr. Xenophon Kallis, who's the Director of Service for Missing Persons. Mr. Kallis has received his BA in Sociology, Social Policy and Administration at the University of Kent at Canterbury in the United Kingdom. During his time in the UK, he was involved in active and exposing human rights violations in different countries. While returning back to Cyprus, and from 1989 to 2016, he was appointed as the first assistant to the Greek Cypriot member of the Committee on Missing Persons, which operates under the auspices of the United Nations. And concurrently, he served as the Director of Service for Missing Persons and Director of the Division of Humanitarian Affairs at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So Kallis is highly involved in the running at the technical level of the program of exhumation and identification of remains of the government of Cyprus in the areas under its control, which started back in 1999 and runs until today. During the past 6 years, he has been serving as an advisor on issues related to missing persons and exhumations to the Presidential Commissioner, Mr. Fotis Fotiu, of which we just heard. He's a gentleman which I've got to know over the years of my visits to Cyprus. I respect him very much for the work that he does. He is the man who goes out there and does the actual excavation, the actual digging. And I've been on numerous occasions leading student delegations to his laboratory, where he has displayed for us unfortunate souls in the form of bones on tables and explaining to us the process of identification. Mr. Kallis, it's a pleasure to welcome you for the first time to one of our AHI programs, and I give you the floor for your opening comments.
Greetings from Cyprus, and I have to admit this is the first time I'm using this technology with the help of my wife, of course. Um, I heard your introductory comments. I wasn't going to speak about the CMP, but I have become a little emotional and I want to speak. I spent more than 30 years working in the CMP. Recently, there is a concerted effort to project the work of the CMP as an ideal uh, form of organization to tackle issues of missing persons in other parts of the world. And I find this effort very dangerous because this is the first time I will speak about the CMP because reality is something different. The CMP was established in 1981 and started its operation in 1981. So we're talking about a committee that operates for 4 decades, for 40 years. And the mandate of this committee is to give answers to families who are living day by day in agony, waiting to be informed if their loved ones are alive or dead. So imagine a committee in a small country like Cyprus. And since you are not here in Cyprus, the population in Cyprus in 1974 was about 650,000 people. So it's a small neighborhood of a big American city. And we have a committee here that operates for nearly half a century with the participation of the United Nations and to give answers to families. I think this is very, very unfortunate and this is very sad. So the important thing about the CMP is Turkey is not represented in it, but Turkey controls behind the scenes everything that is happening in the CMP. The Turkish Cypriot member, the main mandate he or she has is how to protect Turkey. So I cannot see how a committee with the participation of the United Nations can solve even the humanitarian aspect of this problem without the participation of the country that is responsible for the disappearances. It's not the Turkish Cypriots who are responsible for the disappearance in 1974. It's the Turkish army. It's the Turkish army that occupied the north. It's the Turkish army that went for the cleansing of the population. So when in 1981 the CMP was established, they decided a set of rules which constitute the terms of reference. And these rules, they're two very, very important. One is that the committee should not attribute responsibility for the deaths. If you translate this, it means that there is no justice. The committee will not attribute justice. The families deny the right to justice. Another article of the terms of reference is that the committee will not establish the cause of death, which means in simple English that no truth. So we have a committee with the participation of the Secretary General of the United Nations that for the first time in the history of the United Nations, instead of revealing the truth, instead of fighting for the rights of the families of the victims, it tries to hide the truth and to stop the families have justice. So we have this CMP for 40 years. And what we do now, we have this program of exhumation in 2005, which was decided because the government of Cyprus in 1999 started a program of exhumations of Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots under the area's control. And then, because Turkish Cypriot families used to come to the government and ask for help and so on, it was decided to, in the framework of the CMP, to reactivate it, as they call it, and to start this program. And we start this program in 2005. And what we do, what we give back to the families, we give back to the families. If they're lucky, some families, not all families, they get the remains. But the most families, because of as the commissioner said, the intentional removal and the destruction of the burial places by the Turkish army, what we give them, we give them small bones. So the families, they give them small bones to go and bury. And this is very, very tragic because we don't give them any other information, which they have the right, the families, to know all the information. And because of a lot of questions that are still unanswered, this process at the end creates more problems to the families because they cannot allow the families to proceed to a closure. So I think what the CMP is about politics, unfortunately, and is about more or less to protect the actions and the crimes of the Turkish committed by the Turkish army in 1974. And this is a tragic situation, and this is unfortunately that is projected as a model for other situations too. And this is the reason why I spoke in a very emotional way about the CMP, CMP that is a part of my life. So I will go back to what I plan to be my original contribution, and I will be a little philosophical. So we all belong to a society as living or dead. It's very simple. If you're alive, everybody is aware that you exist. At the same time, if you're also dead, the society, the community, the family is aware that you exist in a dead form. This is why we have ceremonies. This is why we have burials. This is why we have a burial site. This is why we have a death certificate. So there are two certificates in our life that are very, very important. One is the birth certificate, and the second is a death certificate. So when it comes to disappearance, to missing persons, for the first time in the history of mankind, a person is not dead and is not alive. So disappearances negates the human essence. For the first time in the history of mankind, we don't exist. So the families live in limbo, the existence. So it's the worst torturing experiences, the agony, the uncertainty of all these families to wait day by day to be informed or to have information about if their loved ones are alive or dead. I mean, families accept death. All of us accept death. It's a part of the circle of life. But in the case of the missing, even death is denied to the families. So this is one of the most torturing aspects of disappearances all over the world. This certainly, and this is why in Cyprus is so criminal, because the CMP has 40 years work. From 1974, the invasion is nearly half a century. Imagine how much pain, how much suffering all these families go day by day in a very small country, in a neighborhood of New York, okay, waiting. And not only the wives, not only the parents, but the children also. So we have generations of Cypriots that will face all these psychological problems because of this living in uncertainty, that your father will come in the Christmas, or your father will come in the Easter, or the CMP will do this, or the CMP will do that, and so on. So this is, for me, this human aspect of disappearance, how it's affecting a human life, the families, is the worst crime. It's the worst crime, this waiting and the uncertainty that they live every day. The second thing I want to talk about is that disappearances all over the world, not just in Cyprus. It's a political act. People don't disappear in thin air. Disappearances are used, and they have been used in Cyprus by the Turkish army and Turkey for political purposes. And the political objective of disappearances in 1974 was the ethnic cleansing. Cyprus was never in its long history ethnically and religiously divided as it is today. This division came by force, came by ethnic cleansing, and disappearances play a very important role besides the psychological, as a psychological tool during the war, as an important role in the ethnic cleansing. There were people staying in their villages, they were arrested, they were released, then they were arrested again, then they were released until they were forced to leave their house. So disappearances is a political act serving political objectives. And the best example for me is Cyprus in 1974, how Turkey used this criminal tool to disappear people in order to achieve its political objectives. And the guilt of Turkey is not only that committed these disappearances. The biggest crime is that for 50 years, it keeps information. It has information, it keeps information, it prevents this information from reaching the family and allowing the families to proceed to a closure. And the investigation of this type of disappearances, when states are involved, is more and very, very difficult for the simple reason that the priority of the state is to protect its agents. And the priority of Turkey is to protect the Turkish army, is to protect the Turkish officer, is to protect all those who committed these horrible crimes. So this is why they keep all the information in the archives. They are not cooperating. They are not giving information about burial places. And the worst is that they're destroying the burial places for a simple reason, because they don't want the burial places to be excavated, because during the excavations there are also elements of truth of what happened. With the excavation, you excavate the truth of what happened to these people. So we have a conspiracy, an international conspiracy, I have to say, because we have here the United Nations, we have here the ICRC 1974 and so on. Imagine all these international mechanisms. Cyprus is a member of the United Nations, is a member of the Council of Europe, is a member of the EU, is a member of regional organizations of protection of human rights. And imagine, for half a century, we cannot give answers, to these families in the center of Europe. And this, nobody, what is all these mechanisms of protection? There are decisions of the European Court of Human Rights for 2001. And how many years now? 2001, 19 years, and they are not implemented. And I go to my last point. And my last point is what we do. And as the commissioner said, we have the program of the CMP, but also we have the program of the government of Cyprus that in cases that we can give answers, our first priority is to give the truth to the families and to relieve their pain and agony. So fortunately, the science is the only ally of these families. So we do investigations when we have a case reported to us. We try to collect all the information. And when we are confident enough that we have good information, we go with archaeologists and we dig the spot. If we find a skeleton, then we take the skeleton to the anthropological laboratory. We have there anthropologists who analyze the skeleton to establish the age, the height, the injuries on the bones, and all other aspects. And after that, after we complete the anthropological phase, then we cut, if the skeleton is complete, we cut a small bone and we give it to the Institute of Genetics in Cyprus, and we carried the DNA. Before we do all these things, we go to the families, we take DNA from the families and all this anthropological information about their loved one. So we are able to compare the DNA from the bone with the DNA from the family. And if it is matching, then we release the remains to the family. So even a small bone has significance. If we identify even a small bone of a person, it has a significance because, as I said in the beginning, missing persons don't exist in society. They are negated by the disappearances. So with the identification of even a small bone, we return and incorporate the missing person to the family, and we return and incorporate the missing person to their community, and we return and incorporate the dignity and the identity of the missing person himself. And this is what is the magical outcome of all these scientific processes. But all this, the science are there. The science are there. The expertise is there. The information is somewhere. So for human questions like issues of missing persons and disappeared persons, there is a prerequisite. And the prerequisite is that should be cooperation, should be a political will to help. And the biggest problem in Cyprus is that Turkey, for half a century, is stubborn, is refusing to cooperate, and is refusing to take the needed humanitarian and political steps to close this chapter of our history, but more importantly, to allow the families to proceed to a closure. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Callis, Mr. Fotiu. I allowed a little bit more latitude for both of you during this occasion, but it's left a little time now for a Q&A, but then we have some interesting questions before us, which I'd like to try to get to. I think it was important to have you provide the full presentation on a subject matter that, again, does not get enough wide attention. Look, unfortunately, politics never creep into humanitarian issues, but they do. And although I understand your frustration, Mr. Callis, regarding the political nature of organizations such as the CMP, I think you can also take solace in the fact that out of the 1,510 Greek Cypriots that were missing, at least 700 have been identified, which leaves you, 810. And I remind you, because one of my first jobs in Washington, D.C. was working for an organization called the National League of Families for POWs and MIAs of missing in Southeast Asia. There were approximately 1,600 missing of the Vietnam War. There's still 1,200 that are still missing from that war. And the relations, of course, now are much better between the United States and Vietnam. Of course, a much larger population in the United States than that of the Republic of Cyprus. But be it as it may, let's go to a question here. And I guess this would probably be for Mr. Fotiu. This comes from our legal counsel, Mr. Nicoramoulis. Is there any legal document that obligates Turkey to cooperate on the missing?
I think that the best legal document is the decision of the European Court for Human Rights. This is, for me, the best legal weapon that we can have against Turkey as far as this humanitarian issue is concerned. But as you can see, even this decision cannot be implemented by Turkey because they are refusing to implement this decision. And every year there is a meeting of the ministers of Europe, the Council of Ministers of Europe, regarding the improvement of this decision, the implementation of the decision by Turkey. And unfortunately, after 19 years, because this decision was in 2001, I think. So after 19 years, Turkey is refusing to respect this decision, European Court for Human Rights. And every year, this Council of Ministers is asking Turkey to cooperate. And they are always playing games with these meetings, games, unfortunately, with some friends worldwide. And still, after 19 years, we are the European Council cannot push Turkey to implement this decision. There are many, many other legal weapons that we have. We have evidence of the crime, because this is a war crime. This is a war crime. The tragedy of missing persons, it's a war crime. And we have so many documents and evidence that we can prove that it's a war crime. But if they cannot, and if they are not respect the decisions, not only by the European Court and international courts, they don't accept the decisions by many, many councils, like the European Parliament, like the United Nations. So this is the issue, unfortunately. They don't respect anything.
Mr. Frattiu, if I may, I want to follow up on regarding the European Court of Human Rights. There was a decision by the Grand Chamber Judgment of 2014 on the question of just satisfaction in the case of Cyprus versus Turkey. And back then, the court awarded an aggregate sum of 90 million euros for damages suffered by the surviving relatives of the missing persons. Obviously, it goes without saying that this judgment was not paid, but we do have a comparison where the Titina Louizidou case of years back regarding not allowing her for the use of her property, if I recall, she was rewarded about 1.2 million at the time. That was awarded, and I believe because there was pressure put on Turkey at that time that they would be expelled from the Council of Europe. Well, why are we being selective in the European Union and Court of Human Rights? Why this appeasement of Turkey, which has been prolific at all stages regarding the Cyprus issue and so many other issues in the Eastern Mediterranean? Can you speak to the this particular judgment?
Yes, it was 30 million euros for missing persons relatives and 60 for enclave people. It was part of the same decision. We are doing our best. Our legal services are doing their best. How we can push Turkey to give this compensation. But believe me, if you discuss this issue with some of the relatives of our missing, they will tell you, we don't want the money. This is not for money. And I'm very proud of these people. We don't want the money. We want our sons to have a funeral before we pass away. This is their answer, so you can understand now.
Absolutely. Mr. Kallis, let me turn this.
I want to add something about this legal aspect, if I may.
Very quickly, if you can.
Because there are 4 interstate applications of Cyprus against Turkey in the Council of Europe and the relevant decisions. In 2001, the 4th application was judged by the newly established European Court of Human Rights. Okay, so this is a legal framework. But at the same time, now when we have identifications of remains and so on, there are hundreds of applications by the families to the European Court of Human Rights. And the European Court examined a lot of these applications and convicted Turkey, like Varnava's case and so on and so on. So if somebody, so there are 2 sets of legal documents. One is interstate applications and the decision of the European Court, and the second is the petitions of the individual families after the identification of the remains to the European Court of Human Rights. And somebody can go back to the records and they can find the decisions and all the information.
No, you're absolutely right. There are so many various legal actions that can be taken against Turkey, but again, we choose not to do so. Let me follow up on a question here with you, Mr. Kadiz. I think this would fall in line maybe with you. One of our members here, who happens to be a Greek Cypriot background, Stathis Panagidis from the DC area, he asked basically a question, has there been any, can you share any experiences of specific events of collaboration between the two sides, such as any friendships and any building of trust between the both sides of the participants?
I was in my capacity as an assistant, a person who have the meetings with a lot of Turkish Cypriots, and even in some cases with in a very discreet way with Turkish officers, okay, who wanted to help in the individual capacity. So there is a paradox, okay, because when we were discussing the possibility of exhumations in the CMP, the official position of everybody, the Turkish Cypriot representative and the United Nations, that if we start digging, then we're going to have revenge, we're going to have problems, we're going to have a new conflict, and so on. So after we started, and I had more or less met all the Turkish Cypriot families and thousands of Turkish Cypriots seeking for information and so on. There's a paradox in Cyprus. At the level of society, at the level of Turkish Cypriots and Greek Cypriots, there is a lot of cooperation in this painful issue. All the information that we have is from ordinary Turkish Cypriots, and they were not involved. The Turkish Cypriots who tried to help us to go and seek information from their grandparents, from their parents, and so on, who might have weakness, and so on. So yes, there is a lot of cooperation at this level of society, and I think at some point, and this is very strange what I will say, society at that level is more advanced, comparing to other levels of our cooperation with Turkish Cypriots and so on. Yes, and I'm very grateful, and I want to take this opportunity to express my sincere feelings and thanks to all these Turkish Cypriots, because these are the people who are helping us, not the official Turkish Cypriots or Turkey.
Nick, as I told you, the pain is the same. Either you are a Greek Cypriot or a Turkish Cypriot, and I can say that on the level of our people, Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots, there is a cooperation and a common effort to give solutions to this problem. But unfortunately, it's not enough. It's not enough. Maybe they have some information. Maybe they have seen some people that now they are in old ages. They have seen some of these crimes, but this is not enough. If we are not going to get the information from the archives of the Turkish army, I am not so optimistic that things will be positive with CMP and missing persons issue.
Well, and the only way that's going to happen is if pressure gets exerted by the European Union and countries such as the United States, which brings me to my next question, and I will take a little time to preface it also for the purpose of our audience. And I know Phil Christopher is on today participating, and we work very closely with Phil and PSECA, and he was intricately involved in initiating and helping to present this legislation back in 1994. And this was a legislation that President Bill Clinton signed into law, H.R. 2826, which to provide for an investigation of the whereabouts of United States citizens and others who have been missing from Cyprus since 1974. Mr. Clinton submitted a report to the Congress in 1998, and as part of that report, there was one American, a 17-year-old teenager by the name of Andrew Kasapis. His remains were identified through DNA and so forth. But since then, to my knowledge at least, and please I'd like you to elaborate, there's been no other such reports that have come forth from an executive, from a president to the Congress as mandated by this piece of legislation. So I guess my question is, what is the current status of any U.S. involvement with CMP? And has there been any follow-ups regarding this legislation and any movement regarding the other 4 American citizens?
First of all, I would like to thank Philip Christopher and Psega for their efforts to support us in this issue. They are doing their best. And as you have mentioned now, Nick, back in, I think it was 1984, that we had that public law regarding
1994.
Okay, regarding missing persons. But I think, and this is what they have told me, that this public law is not active right now. So maybe after the elections, we can think if we can put some efforts and with our people there in the Congress to have it again. This is what they told me.
I understand that this law is still active, but I will double check on it. Who told you that?
Double check, because this is what they have told me from United States, that is not active anymore. I don't know, I cannot understand why not. This is peculiar if it's not active, but if this is true, then we have to try again, because as I told you, there are American citizens still in the list. So maybe it's an incentive for Congress and the administration to do it and pass a new law. Something else that we can do from United States. Maybe we can push and they will appoint a rapporteur by the United States Congress for the issue of the missing person.
Like an envoy, you mean, like an envoy?
Yes. And of course, something else that we can try, and you can try, and Philip and Psega and our federation and you and everybody, if there can be a visit of a group of United States congressmen to Cyprus, just to get aware of this humanitarian problem.
Well, on that point, though, Mr. Commissioner, there have been over the years congressional delegations, including the Vice President himself, who visited there. I'm sorry, Vice President Biden, who now, of course, you know, it will be more likely than not the Democratic candidate for. They come to Cyprus. What does the government of Cyprus do regarding, you know, this particular issue? Is it ever brought up, you know, in any succinct way to them in terms of, you know, this issue?
Yes, but you know, if a group of these people will visit Cyprus specifically for missing persons, it's different. It's not the same thing if Vice President will visit Cyprus, or a senator will visit Cyprus and just have a meeting also with CMP. No, but if there will be a specific mission of this group of people from the Congress, this will be more effective and will give the message that the United States is, yes, interested in supporting this issue, the efforts to solve this issue, and maybe this will have a different message to some other countries that they have to push Turkey too.
We are coming close. We still got a few more minutes, but we're going to wrap it up here soon. Let me, one last question, and both of you can answer if you like. And this comes from one of our current interns who is working remotely for us, and he's a student at Ohio State University. And as you can understand, the academic setting is a proper place where a humanitarian issue can really get gravitas and get some momentum. And he asked basically, what would you recommend for young individuals who are students and in the diaspora? What could they do in terms of trying to bring more awareness regarding this issue?
I think that we have discussed with our young generation abroad many ideas, but I think that if they want to do something just to spread the message that in Cyprus, 46 years after the Turkish invasion, still mothers and fathers are waiting to have funerals for their sons, then I believe that we can prepare some events with photos of our people, of our missing persons, some videos, and as you know, Monique, we have discussed this. We have also 14 children among our missing persons, ages from 6 to 14. And I think that this is something that we can take in advantage in a good way, so that we can have this awareness from people, from not only our people abroad, but people from many countries, so that they can push their administrations.
That will be your closing comments, Mr. Fotil. Mr. Cadiz, any closing comments from you?
A very simple one. I think, I'm not a politician, so I never deal at the political level. But I think at the individual level, each and every one of us can do a lot of things. And that's from where I start. I think in the last analysis, governments can do X, organizations can do Y. But in the last analysis, what really matters is us, the ordinary people, the individual, or how much conscience we have and how much we are prepared to sacrifice some of our time in order to fight for principles like justice, like equality, like truth. And I think all the students there in the United States and the universities and so on. I mean, I cannot give ideas right now, but there are a lot of things. So for me, a lot depends on us because we constitute the society. The society is us, so we can change it.
Well, certainly students who are listening can write a paper for their school, for a course in school. They can create some programs to raise awareness, bring speakers and so forth. There's a lot of things you can do, but I just wanted to bring up the question almost rhetorically. And if I didn't mention his name, he's doing great work for us, Anthony Katsounis. I'm not sure if I mentioned his name, but I did want to mention it. Look, at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, you who are tuning in, we are still faced with the situation of over 800 individuals in a country with a population of just about 1 million people, which is enough far-fetched to say that approximately every single household on the island of Cyprus is affected by this particular issue. And as the commissioner said, time is running out in terms of those who are still living from 74 to be able to put some closure and to put a death certificate and to put a closure in the life, as Mr. Kadi said, to these individuals who unfortunately are still collateral damage is, I guess, a term that's used today in warfare as it relates to 1974. And humanitarian issues should not be seeped in political discourse. And the international community has a responsibility regarding to put pressure on Turkey and to stop the appeasement once and for all. And from where I stand, it has to be led by the United States of America, which has a responsibility for the happenings in 1974, including violations of international law, the UN Charter, the NATO Treaty, and U.S. law itself as to the developments of Cyprus in 1974. I do want to wish rather like to thank our presenters here today once again for taking their time. It's almost 10 o'clock in the evening in Cyprus, and it's been a long day for them, and for them to spend this time and to bring awareness on an issue that is now well known. And I can reiterate to them and to those listening that the American Atlantic Institute will be reinvigorated on this issue moving forward. And we will look at this particular law, which I'm rather certain, I believe, is still active. And if it's not, well, we need to reactivate some form of legislation and try to bring some closure to bear. We're 4 American citizens, and we as a country have a responsibility to those 4 American citizens. As always, I'd like to thank my AHI staff, led by Yola Pakchanian, Elias Yerasulis, my researcher, and Emily Panda is my producer. And I'd like to remind all of you as we continue in our next week's Zoom, and on the theme of Cyprus, we will discuss the Cyprus Exclusive Economic Zone, the law of the sea, and Turkey's maritime claims. And we will have with us Ambassador Andrew Iacovidis and our own legal counsel, Nick Karambulis, AHI Legal Counsel. Many of you who have been following know of the invasion into Cyprus's economic exclusive zone. And we will have these 2 experts provide us with details regarding these violations. Until then, I remind you all, these things need resources to happen at the Institute. So we remind you to become supporters, donate, contribute, become members to the Institute. It's in this way we can only continue to do the work that we are tasked with doing here in promoting this relationship of U.S.-Greece and U.S.-Cyprus. And you can go to our website at ahiworld.org either to donate or become members. But until next time, I'd like to thank you once again on behalf of our presenters here today from Cyprus. All of you, thank you for tuning in. And I wish you a good afternoon or a good evening wherever you are. Thank you once again, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.